The transport ship landed on Kepler 442c with a loud thud that shook the entire hull. Jake Martinez pressed his face against the small window and looked out at the alien world. The sky was purple, and strange trees with silver leaves swayed in the wind. Everything looked different from Earth, but that was why he was here. Jake was the only human on the research team. The other scientists were aliens from different planets across the galaxy. They had invited Earth to join their big science group, called the Galactic Research Consortium, just 2 years ago. Earth was still new to this whole space thing, so they only sent one person to each mission. Dr. Vex High was the leader of their team. She looked like a giant bug with 4 arms and big round eyes that could see in all directions at once. Her skin was green and shiny like metal. When she talked, her voice sounded like she was clicking her tongue all the time. "Human Jake," she said as they walked down the ship's ramp. "Stay close to the group. This planet is very dangerous for soft creatures like you." Jake nodded and followed behind her. He carried his equipment bag and tried not to trip on the rocky ground. The other aliens moved easily across the rough surface. Their feet were made for this kind of walking. There was Dr. Kethmer, who looked like a big frog that could stand on 2 legs. His skin was always wet and shiny. He studied how different creatures think and act. Then there was Zenara, who looked like she was made of blue crystals. Light passed through her body and made pretty colors. She was the team's expert on planet environments. The research station was already built when they arrived. It looked like a big metal box with lots of windows and tall antennas sticking out of the top. Inside, there were computers everywhere, and screens showing maps of the planet. "This planet has very dangerous animals," Dr. Vex High explained to Jake. "The biggest and most dangerous ones are called shadow maws. They are 12 feet tall and have 6 arms with very sharp claws. They can spit acid that burns through metal." Jake looked at the pictures on the computer screen. The shadow maws looked like a mix between a bear and a spider, but much bigger and scarier. Their teeth were as long as his fingers. "How do we study them safely?" Jake asked. Dr. Kethmer made a sound that Jake thought was laughing. "We use energy barriers and special fields that make their brains sleepy. We never get close to them. Only primitive species fight with their bodies." The other aliens seemed to agree. They talked about their advanced technology and how it kept them safe. Jake listened quietly. On Earth, people still hunted and fished, and climbed mountains. Maybe that made humans primitive, but Jake didn't think it was a bad thing. Over the next few days, Jake learned how the research station worked. The aliens had captured 3 shadow maws and kept them in special cages made of energy beams. The cages looked like blue light, but the animals couldn't break through them. The shadow maws paced back and forth in their cages like angry cats. Sometimes they would roar, and the sound was so loud it made the walls shake. Jake watched them carefully. He noticed how they moved, how they hunted the small creatures that the aliens fed them. "Why do you stare at them so much?" Zenara asked Jake one day. Her crystal body made musical sounds when she moved. "I'm trying to understand how they think," Jake said. "On Earth, we have dangerous animals too. Lions, bears, sharks. If you understand how they think, you can predict what they'll do." "That is very primitive thinking," Dr. Vex High said. She was always listening to their conversations. "We use brain scanners and computer models, much more accurate than guessing." Jake didn't argue, but he kept watching the shadow maws. He noticed that the biggest one, which the aliens called Alpha 7, was always testing the energy barrier. It would touch different parts with its claws, looking for weak spots. It was smart, maybe smarter than the aliens realized. The aliens often talked to each other in their own languages when Jake was around. They thought he couldn't understand them, but Jake had been studying their languages since he joined the mission. He heard them say things like weak human and soft-skinned creature. And why did they send something so fragile? Jake wrote about this in his personal log every night. He didn't get angry about their comments. He understood why they thought humans were weak. Compared to them, humans did look fragile. No armor, no natural weapons, no special powers. But Jake knew something the aliens didn't understand. Humans had survived on Earth by being tougher than they looked. They had fought saber-tooth tigers and giant bears. They had climbed the highest mountains and crossed the deepest oceans. They had learned to use their brains and their bodies together in ways that other creatures couldn't. The aliens relied on their technology for everything. Their energy barriers, their computer systems, their special tools. Jake wondered what would happen if their technology stopped working. Would they know how to survive with just their bodies and their minds? One evening, Jake was cleaning his equipment when Lisa Parker walked into the lab. She was the human communications officer, the only other person from Earth on the entire planet. She looked tired and worried. The weather station is showing some strange readings, she told Jake. There might be a big storm coming. Solar activity is getting really high. Jake looked at the data on her tablet. The numbers didn't look good. High solar activity could cause problems with electronic equipment. All of the research station's safety systems ran on electronics. Have you told the others? Jake asked. Dr. Vex High says their systems are too advanced to be affected by solar storms, Lisa said. She thinks I'm worrying about nothing. Jake looked over at the Shadow Maw cages. The energy barriers hummed quietly, keeping the dangerous creatures contained. If those barriers failed during a storm, the research team would be in serious trouble. Maybe we should prepare some backup plans, Jake suggested. Just in case. Lisa nodded, but they both knew the aliens wouldn't listen. They were too confident in their technology. Jake hoped they were right, but his human instincts told him to be ready for anything. The solar storm hit 3 days later, just as Lisa had predicted. Jake was in the main lab studying shadow maw feeding patterns when the lights started flickering. At first, it was just a few quick flashes, but then the whole room went dark for several seconds. What is happening? Dr. Vex High's voice clicked with worry as emergency lights came on. The red glow made everything look scary and dangerous. Solar storm, Lisa said, running into the lab with her tablet. It's much stronger than we thought. The electromagnetic pulse is interfering with all our systems. Jake looked toward the containment area where the 3 shadow maws were kept. The blue energy barriers were flickering on and off like broken light bulbs. Each time they disappeared, he could see the massive creatures inside lifting their heads and sniffing the air. The barriers are failing, Jake said, but Dr. Vex High was too busy with her computer to listen. Impossible, she clicked. Our systems are designed to handle solar activity. The backup generators will fix everything in a few minutes, but the barriers kept flickering. Jake watched as Alpha 7, the biggest shadow maw, moved closer to the edge of its cage. The creature had been testing the barriers for weeks, and now it could sense weakness. Zinara's crystal body was flashing red and orange, which Jake had learned meant she was scared. The environmental controls are failing too, she said in her musical voice. Temperature regulation, air filters, everything is going offline. Dr. Kefmer was making loud croaking sounds, which was how his species showed panic. His wet skin was turning darker colors. We need to evacuate to the emergency shelter, he said. The protocols clearly state that if containment fails, we must leave immediately. Jake kept watching the shadow maws. Alpha 7 was now pressing against the barrier with one of its clawed hands. Every time the energy field flickered, the creature pushed harder. The other 2 shadow maws were doing the same thing in their cages. We need to move now, Jake said. Those barriers won't hold much longer. The backup systems will activate any second, Dr. Vex High insisted. But her voice didn't sound confident anymore. That's when it happened. The lights went completely dark, and Jake heard a sound like breaking glass. When the emergency lights came back on, Alpha 7 was standing in the middle of the lab, free from its cage. The energy barrier was completely gone. The alien scientists froze. Jake had never seen anything like it. These advanced beings who traveled between stars and built amazing technology just stood there like statues. Their bodies were designed to hide or blend in when faced with danger, not to fight. Alpha 7 was even bigger outside its cage. It stood almost 13 feet tall, and its 6 arms moved like tree branches in a storm. Its 4 eyes looked around the room, studying each person. Acid dripped from its mouth and sizzled on the metal floor. "Don't move," Jake whispered, but it was too late. Dr. Kefmer's panic made him croak loudly, and the sound attracted the Shadowmaw's attention. The creature turned toward the frog-like alien and took a step forward. Its claws made scraping sounds. On the floor, Jake could smell something like burned metal and rotting meat coming from the beast. "Run to the emergency shelter," Dr. Vexhai clicked quietly, but none of them moved. They were all too scared. That's when Jake heard the sound of metal being torn apart. The other 2 Shadowmaws had also broken free from their failing cages. Now there were 3 of the deadly creatures loose in the research station. "Lisa," Jake called out, "where are you?" "Storage room." Her voice came from somewhere behind a wall of equipment. "I can't get out. One of them is blocking the door." Jake looked around the lab. The second Shadowmaw was indeed standing near the storage area, sniffing at the air. It had caught Lisa's scent and was trying to figure out how to get to her. The third creature was moving toward the group of alien scientists. Dr. Vexhai, Zinara, and Dr. Kefmer were huddled together near the main computer console. They looked like children hiding from a monster. Jake realized that all of the aliens' advanced technology was useless now. Their energy weapons needed power from the main systems. Their protective suits were designed for environmental dangers, not for fighting. Their emergency protocols assumed that their containment systems would work. "The neural dampening fields are offline," Zinara said in a voice like breaking glass. "We cannot make them sleepy anymore. The emergency beacon is not working either," Dr. Kefmer croaked. "No one knows we are in trouble." Alpha 7 was still staring at the group of scientists. Jake could see intelligence in its 4 eyes. The creature was deciding which target to attack first. It was a predator, and predators always went for the weakest prey. Jake slowly reached into his equipment bag and pulled out a metal tool. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was something. The Shadowmaw's eyes followed his movement, and Jake realized he had made a mistake. Now the creature was looking at him instead of the others. "Jake, no," Lisa's voice came from the storage room. "Don't make it angry." But it was too late. Alpha 7 had decided that Jake was either a threat or easy prey. The massive creature took another step forward, and Jake could see its muscles tensing under its dark fur. It was getting ready to attack. The alien scientists watched in horror as the humans stepped away from their group. To them, Jake looked incredibly small and weak compared to the Shadowmaw. His soft skin offered no protection against those razor-sharp claws. His small human teeth were nothing compared to the creature's fangs. "Human Jake," Dr. Vexhai clicked frantically. "Get behind us. We will try to distract it." But Jake didn't move backward. Instead, he took a step toward the Shadowmaw. The creature tilted its head, confused by this behavior. Most prey animals ran away when faced with a predator. This small human was doing the opposite. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. His hands were sweating, but his mind was clear. He thought about all the nature documentaries he had watched on Earth, all the books he had read about predator behavior. He thought about his grandfather, who had been a hunter and had taught Jake about reading animal body language. The Shadowmaw lowered its head and bared its teeth. Acid dripped faster from its mouth. Jake could see the creature's breathing getting faster. It was working itself up for an attack. Behind him, Jake could hear the aliens making scared sounds. They were probably recording everything, thinking. They were about to watch a human get torn apart by an alpha predator. Jake spread his feet apart and raised his hands. It wasn't a fighting stance from any martial art. It was just the natural way humans prepared to defend themselves. The way his ancestors had stood when facing saber-toothed tigers and cave bears. The Shadowmaw's 4 eyes narrowed. It could sense that something was different about this prey. This human wasn't running or hiding. It was standing its ground, ready to fight. Jake took a deep breath and waited. The creature would attack soon, and when it did, he would find out if millions of years of human evolution had prepared him for this moment. Alpha 7 moved like lightning. 1 second it was standing 10 feet away, and the next second it was flying through the air toward Jake with all 6 claws reaching out to tear him apart. Jake didn't think. His body just moved. He stepped to the side at the last possible moment, and the massive creature flew past him and crashed into a table full of computers. Sparks flew everywhere as the equipment broke apart. The alien scientists couldn't believe what they had just seen. Dr. Vex's eyes 4 arms were shaking as she recorded everything on her device. Impossible, she clicked. The human moved faster than our sensors could track. But Jake wasn't done. As the Shadowmaw tried to get back on its feet, Jake grabbed 2 of its arms. His hands locked around the creature's wrists like iron clamps. The beast was much bigger and stronger, but Jake had something it didn't expect. Humans had the strongest grip of any species their size in the known galaxy. Millions of years of using tools and climbing trees had made their hands incredibly powerful. Jake's fingers could crush objects that would break alien bones. Alpha 7 roared and tried to pull its arms free, but Jake held on tight. The creature's acid spit flew through the air, but Jake ducked his head and let it splash harmlessly on the floor behind him. How is he holding it? Dr. Kefmer croaked in amazement. That creature weighs over 800 pounds. Jake used the Shadowmaw's own strength against it. When the beast pulled backward, Jake pushed forward. When it tried to turn left, Jake forced it to go right. It was like a deadly dance, and Jake was leading. The creature swung its other 4 arms at Jake, trying to rake him with its claws. But Jake was ready. He ducked under one swipe, jumped over another, and twisted his body to avoid the third. The 4th claw barely missed his shoulder and tore through his shirt instead. Zinara's crystal body was flashing so many colors it looked like a rainbow. The human is predicting its attacks, she sang in her musical voice. How can he know what it will do before it does it? Jake could read the Shadowmaw's body language like a book. Every muscle twitch told him where the next attack would come from. Every shift in weight warned him which way the creature would move. This was something humans had learned from hunting and being hunted for millions of years. The Shadowmaw tried a different strategy. It dropped to the ground and tried to roll over, hoping to crush Jake underneath its massive body. But Jake saw it coming and let go of the creature's arms at exactly the right moment. As the beast rolled, Jake jumped onto its back. The Shadowmaw's fur was thick and oily, but Jake's hands found grip anyway. He wrapped his arms around the creature's neck and held on as it bucked and thrashed like an angry horse. He's riding it, Dr. Vexhai clicked in disbelief. The human is actually riding an alpha predator. The Shadowmaw rolled again, trying to crush Jake against the floor. Jake felt the weight of the creature press down on him, but he didn't let go. His ribs hurt and his lungs felt crushed, but he knew that if he lost his grip now, the beast would kill him. When the creature rolled back upright, Jake was still on its back. The Shadowmaw spun in circles, trying to throw him off, but Jake moved with it like he was part of the animal. His legs gripped tight around its middle, and his arms stayed locked around its neck. The other 2 Shadowmaws had been watching the fight, but now they started moving closer. Jake could see them out of the corner of his eye. If they joined the battle, He wouldn't stand a chance against 3 of them at once. "Lisa," Jake called out between the creature's wild movements. "Are you still safe?" "Yes," her voice came from the storage room. "But I can see the other 2 getting closer to you." Jake knew he had to end this fight quickly. The shadow maw underneath him was getting tired, but so was he. His muscles were burning from the effort of holding on, and sweat was dripping into his eyes. That's when Jake remembered something his grandfather had taught him about wrestling with large animals. "Find the pressure points," the old man had said. "Every creature has spots where a little pressure does a lot of damage." Jake shifted his grip and found the spot where the shadow maw's neck met its skull. He pressed his thumbs into the soft tissue there, right where the major blood vessels were. The creature's struggles became weaker almost immediately. "What is he doing now?" Dr. Kefmer asked. "He's cutting off the blood flow to its brain," Zinara answered, her voice full of wonder. "But how does he know where to press?" The shadow maw's movements became slower and less coordinated. Jake could feel the fight going out of the massive creature. But he also knew that the other 2 beasts were getting closer. He could hear their claws clicking on the metal floor. "Jake, look out!" Lisa shouted from her hiding place. One of the other shadow maws was charging toward them. Jake had maybe 3 seconds before it would reach him. He was still holding onto Alpha 7, but the new attacker would tear him apart before he could let go and defend himself. Jake made a decision that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. Instead of letting go of Alpha 7, he used the creature's body as a weapon. As the second shadow maw jumped toward him, Jake twisted hard to the right and swung Alpha 7's body like a giant club. The 2 massive creatures collided in midair with a sound like thunder. Both of them crashed to the ground in a tangle of arms and legs and claws. Jake rolled away just as they hit the floor, his shirt torn and his arms bleeding from small cuts. The third shadow maw stopped its advance and looked at the 2 creatures. On the ground, Alpha 7 was still alive but stunned. The second beast was trying to get back on its feet, but seemed confused about what had just happened. Jake stood up slowly, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. His hair was messy and his clothes were torn, but his eyes were clear and focused. He looked at the third shadow maw and raised his hands again, ready for another fight. The alien scientists stared at him like they were seeing a ghost. This soft, weak human had just used one alpha predator as a weapon against another. It was something that should have been impossible, but they had watched it happen with their own eyes. "What are you?" Dr. Vex High whispered, her clicking voice full of fear and respect. Doc Jake didn't answer. He was watching the creatures on the ground, waiting to see what they would do next. The fight wasn't over yet, and he knew that the most dangerous part was still coming. Alpha 7 shook its massive head and slowly got back on its feet. The collision with the second shadow maw had stunned it, but now anger burned in its 4 eyes. No prey had ever fought back like this human. No creature had ever used its own pack member as a weapon against it. Jake watched the beast carefully. He could see that it was hurt, but still very dangerous. Blood was dripping from a cut above one of its eyes, and it was favoring its left side, where it had hit the floor. But injured animals were often more dangerous than healthy ones. The second shadow maw was also getting up, moving more slowly than before. It kept looking back and forth between Jake and Alpha 7, like it couldn't understand what had happened. The third creature stayed where it was, watching everything with intelligent eyes. "Jake," Lisa called from her hiding spot. "The emergency power is trying to come back online. I can see some lights flickering in the other room." Jake nodded but didn't take his eyes off the shadow maws. If the power came back, maybe the containment fields would work again. But that could take several more minutes, and he didn't have that much time. Dr. Vex High was still recording everything with her device. Her clicking sounds were very quiet now, like she was afraid to make noise. "Incredible," she whispered. The human's heart rate is actually slower now than when the fight started. How is that possible? Jake's grandfather had taught him about that too. When you're really fighting for your life, the old man had said, your body finds a calm place. Your heart slows down, your breathing gets steady, and your mind becomes very clear. That's when you're most dangerous. Alpha 7 began to circle around Jake, looking for the best angle to attack. The creature had learned that human was not ordinary prey. It needed to be more careful this time. Jake turned slowly, keeping the beast in front of him. He could feel the other two shadow maws moving to surround him, but he couldn't watch all three at once. This was the most dangerous part of any fight, when the enemy had numbers and position. That's when Jake did something that shocked everyone in the room. He started making noise. "Come on," he shouted at Alpha 7. "You want to fight? Let's fight." The aliens couldn't believe it. Dr. Kethmer's croaking sounds got louder. Why is he making noise? That will make them more aggressive. But Jake knew exactly what he was doing. He had studied these creatures for weeks. He knew that shadow maws were pack hunters, but they had a strict order of dominance. Alpha 7 was the leader, and the other two would wait for it to make the first move. By challenging the Alpha directly, Jake was forcing it to fight alone. The other creatures couldn't attack until their leader gave them permission, and Alpha 7's pride wouldn't let it ask for help against a small human. The plan worked. Alpha 7 roared and charged again, leaving the other two behind. But this time, Jake was ready for a different kind of fight. Instead of trying to grab the creature or wrestle with it, Jake stayed on his feet and kept moving. When the shadow maw swiped with its claws, Jake stepped back just far enough to avoid them. When it tried to bite him, he ducked and moved to the side. "He's wearing it out," Zenara sang in amazement. "The human is making the creature chase him until it gets tired." Jake had learned this technique from watching persistence hunters on Earth. Humans were some of the best endurance runners in the animal kingdom. They could run for hours without stopping, while bigger predators would get tired after just a few minutes of intense activity. The shadow maw was getting frustrated. It was used to quick kills, not long chases. Its breathing was getting heavier, and its movements were becoming less precise. Jake could see sweat forming on its dark fur. That's when Jake made his move. As Alpha 7 lunged forward with all 6 arms, Jake dropped low and swept his leg across the creature's ankles. The beast's own momentum carried it forward, but now it had nothing to land on. The massive shadow maw crashed face first into the floor with a sound like a falling tree. Before it could get up, Jake was on its back again. But this time, he didn't just hold on. He grabbed the creature's head and twisted it to the side, putting pressure on its neck in a very specific way. "What is he doing now?" Dr. Vex High asked, her voice full of fear. Jake had found the creature's spine, right where it connected to the skull. This was the most vulnerable spot on any animal with a backbone. A little pressure in the right place could paralyze or even kill. Alpha 7 struggled wildly, but Jake's position was perfect. The creature couldn't reach him with its claws, and it couldn't roll over without breaking its own neck. Jake increased the pressure slowly and steadily. "He's going to kill it." Dr. Kethmer croaked in horror. With his bare hands, the other two shadow maws were getting agitated. They could sense that their leader was in real danger, but they still couldn't attack without permission. They paced back and forth, making low growling sounds. Jake could feel Alpha 7's struggles getting weaker. The creature's breathing was becoming labored, and its movements were less coordinated. But Jake didn't feel good about what he was doing. He didn't enjoy killing, even to protect himself and his friends. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the creature, "but you didn't give me a choice." Alpha 7 made one last desperate attempt to break free, arching its back and trying to throw Jake off. But Jake held on tight and gave one final twist. The sound was very quiet, like a small branch snapping. but everyone in the room heard it. Alpha 7's body went completely limp, and its head fell to the floor at an unnatural angle. Jake slowly released his grip and stood up. The laboratory was completely silent, except for the distant sound of alarms and the heavy breathing of the remaining Shadowmaws. The alien scientists stared at Jake like they had never seen him before. This soft, weak human had just killed an alpha predator with nothing but his hands and his knowledge of anatomy. He had done something that their advanced weapons and technology couldn't do. "How?" Dr. Vexhai whispered. "How did you know exactly where to apply pressure?" Jake looked down at his hands. They were shaking now that the fight was over. "Humans had to learn these things to survive," he said quietly. "On Earth, everything was trying to kill us. We had to become very good at killing back." The two remaining Shadowmaws looked at their dead leader, then at Jake, then at each other. Something had changed in their eyes. The challenge and aggression were gone, replaced by something Jake had never seen in a predator before. Fear. They were afraid of him. Jake picked up a piece of broken metal from the floor and held it like a weapon. The Shadowmaws saw the movement and took several steps backward. They were no longer looking at him like he was prey. They were looking at him like he was the apex predator. "The emergency power is coming back online," Lisa called from her hiding spot. "I can see the containment field generator starting to boot up." Jake nodded but kept watching the two remaining creatures. He could see intelligence in their eyes, and he knew they were making a decision. They could try to avenge their leader, or they could accept that this strange human was something they didn't want to fight. The creatures looked at each other, then back at Jake. Then, slowly, they began to back away toward the far corner of the laboratory. They had made their choice. The blue energy barriers flickered back to life just as the two remaining Shadowmaws reached the far corner of the laboratory. The creatures looked at the glowing walls that suddenly appeared around them, then at Jake, then at their dead leader. Lying motionless on the floor, Jake dropped the piece of metal he had been holding and walked slowly toward the storage room where Lisa was hiding. His legs felt shaky now that the danger was over, and he could feel all the small cuts and bruises on his body starting to hurt. "Lisa," he called softly, "it's safe now. The barriers are back up." The storage room door opened carefully, and Lisa stepped out. Her face was pale, and her hands were trembling. She looked at Jake, then at the dead Shadowmaw, then back at Jake again. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jake checked himself quickly. His shirt was torn and bloody, and he had scratches on his arms and back. One of his ribs hurt when he breathed, and his hands were sore from gripping the creature so tightly, but nothing was seriously damaged. "I'm okay," he said. "Just some cuts and bruises." Lisa hugged him tightly, and Jake could feel her shaking. "I thought you were going to die," she said. "When that thing charged at you, I thought there was no way you could survive." The alien scientists were still standing in the same spot where the fight had started. They hadn't moved during the entire battle, frozen by fear and disbelief. Now they were staring at Jake like he was some kind of monster. Dr. Vexhai was the first to speak. Her clicking sounds were very quiet and uncertain. "Human Jake," she said, "what you just did should not be possible. Our computers calculated that a Shadowmaw has 47 times the physical strength of an average human." Jake sat down on a nearby chair, suddenly feeling very tired. "Strength isn't everything," he said. "Sometimes knowing how to use what you have is more important than how much you have." Xenora's crystal body was still flashing different colors, but they were softer now, like she was trying to understand something difficult. "You knew exactly where to attack the creature," she sang. "You knew how to predict its movements." "How did you learn these things?" "Every human learns them," Jake said. "Maybe not the fighting part, but we all learn to read body language and understand how animals think. It's how we survived for millions of years." Dr. Kefmer made a soft croaking sound. On our worlds, we evolved to hide from predators or to blend in with our surroundings. We never learned to fight them directly. Jake looked at the three alien scientists and realized something important. They weren't just shocked by what he had done. They were afraid of him. The way they stood, the way they looked at him, the way they kept their distance. It was the same way the surviving shadow maws were acting. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jake said gently. "I only fought because I had to protect Lisa and all of us. Humans don't like violence. We just know how to use it when we have no other choice." Dr. Vexhaya's recording device was still running. She looked at it, then at Jake, then spoke in a voice that sounded very different from before. "I need to report this to the Galactic Research Consortium," she said. "They need to know what humans are capable of. What will you tell them?" Jake asked. Dr. Vexhaya thought for a moment. "I will tell them that we made a mistake," she said. "We thought humans were weak because you have soft skin and no natural weapons. But we didn't understand that you have something much more dangerous." "What's that?" Lisa asked. "Intelligence combined with the willingness to use violence," Zenara answered. "Most species in the galaxy have one or the other, but not both. Humans have both." Jake stood up and walked over to Alpha 7's body. The massive creature looked smaller somehow, now that it wasn't moving. He knelt down and gently closed its 4 eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. "You were just doing what your nature told you to do." The alien scientists watched this gesture with confusion. Dr. Kethmer croaked softly. "Why do you apologize to something you killed in self-defense?" "Because taking a life should never be easy," Jake said. "Even when you have to do it to survive. The moment it becomes easy is the moment you stop being human." Over the next few hours, the research station systems came back online completely. The 2 surviving shadow maws were moved to stronger containment fields, and Jake's injuries were treated in the medical bay. The aliens worked around him quietly, speaking in whispers when they thought he couldn't hear. But Jake could hear them. And he understood more of their languages than they realized. They were discussing him in scared, respectful voices. Words like apex predator and death world species, and primitive but deadly, kept coming up in their conversations. That evening, Jake sat in his quarters writing his daily report. He tried to explain what had happened in simple, factual terms. But he knew that his words couldn't capture the reality of what the aliens had witnessed. Lisa knocked on his door and came in with 2 cups of coffee. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Different," Jake said honestly. "I've never killed anything that big before. I've never had to fight for my life like that." "You saved all of us," Lisa said. "If you hadn't stopped Alpha 7, it would have killed everyone in the lab." Jake nodded, but he still felt strange about the whole situation. "The way they look at me now," he said. "It's like they're seeing me for the first time." "Maybe they are," Lisa said. "Maybe we all are." The next morning, Dr. Vexhaya called a team meeting. She stood in front of the group with her recording device and several data tablets. Her clicking sounds were formal and official. "I have been in contact with the Galactic Research Consortium," she announced. "They are sending a new team to take over this research station. Our mission here is complete." "What about the Shadow Maw?" "Research?" Jake asked. "The research will continue," Dr. Vexhaya said, "but with new protocols. The consortium has decided that all future missions involving dangerous predators must include human personnel." Jake was surprised. "Why?" Dr. Kethmer answered with a sound that might have been respect. "Because you understand predators in a way that we do not. You think like them, but you can also think beyond them. You are what humans call a predators." "Predator." Zenora's crystal body flashed in agreement. "The consortium wants to study human combat capabilities," she sang. "They want to understand how a species with no natural weapons became the most dangerous hunters in the galaxy." Jake looked out the window at the alien landscape. In the distance, he could see other creatures moving through the silver trees. Some of them were probably as dangerous as the Shadow Maws, maybe more so. "I hope they learn the right lessons," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" Dr. Vex High S. Jake turned back to the group. "Humans aren't dangerous because we like to fight," he said. "We're dangerous because we learned that sometimes fighting is the only way to protect the things we care about. That's a big difference." As the transport ship arrived to take them back to the space station, Jake packed his equipment and personal belongings. The other aliens gave him plenty of space, still not quite sure how to act around him. But Jake noticed something else. When they talked to him now, their voices carried a new tone. It wasn't just fear. It was respect. For the first time since joining the Galactic Research Consortium, Jake felt like he was truly part of the team. Not because he was human, but because he had proven that humans brought something valuable to the galaxy. Something that couldn't be built with technology or programmed into computers. That's something that had been earned through millions of years of survival on a world where everything was trying to kill you. And sometimes, Jake thought as he watched the alien sun set over the dangerous planet, that was exactly what the galaxy needed.